thing that we need to do before we mate the nose section is install the tank. So what I did here is I opened the tank. Obviously I always do this, inspect it, and that looks good, so you can see that everything is wire wrapped correctly. The only thing I did here was, as you can see, I don't know if that's going to show on camera, there's a little bit of lubricant on here, and that's because I took out the O-ring and lubricated that before sticking it back in. And what I used was this stuff from BVM, so they have this Super O lube, so I just went over that O-ring and lubricated it before closing this back up. So I did the same for the smoke side as well, and so both of those are nicely lubricated and they've been inspected, so you can see some of that lube as well over there and on the O-ring. And the smoke side as well, let's see, yeah, you can see that looks pretty well done. So no big changes for me here, just lubing that O-ring, and then we're gonna stick that back in the jet. The reason we do this is because in order to mate the front section of the jet, the tank has to be in. So my tank is installed, that screw is tight. I have wire wrapped and installed flexible hosing for the two vents, so that's good to go. So you can see that's been tie wrapped there. We've also tie wrapped the top on both sides, as well as the fuel side, the smoke side, which you can see tie wrapped there. So what's left now is to mate the front and finish up this wiring. There we go. And the L39 is together for the second time, but this time a lot of the wiring has been done. This ledge comes together with four sort of screws, 1, 2, and there's 3 and 4. And before I attach those, I just added some blue Loctite to it and then assembled it. So next thing we're gonna do is think about our layout. Alright, so what I did now is move from these wires. These are the wires that come from the back of the aircraft, elevator, wings, gear, whatnot. And you can see that it's a huge bundle, a mess of wires. But what I did is I added some snakeskin to it, and this is what was the result. So you add some snakeskin, and I'm adding connectors to it. I'm adding these JST connectors, and the reason for that is in order to connect from the SmoothFlite to any of the elevators, I want to have a harness that is disconnectable. So I'm going to have the mating connector for these guys made up, and then the other end of that will actually be the servo connectors that go into here. And the reason for doing that is so that it's easy to disassemble the plane. Obviously the neck of the aircraft comes apart, and so this way you can take off the nose section, disconnect these guys, and the back is clear from the front. And I'll do the same for the fuel system as well with Festo connectors. And so you can see this mess of wires cleans up into just a bunch of connectors, and that looks clean. I didn't have my shrink wrap labeler, so I just grabbed a regular labeler and added these on. And so these are right, and then it says aileron flap gear door, and basically I have this silver mark here that says the order. So this is the start. So the first 3 wires would be the right aileron, and then the next 3 wires would be the right flap, and then the last door, the last wires, 3 wires would be the gear door. So all of these are labeled in that convention. I'm gonna get that wiring done on the other side of the wing. I won't show that. And then the next time we will probably see this, I'll also have the connecting harness built up for this, as well as for the light control, which is going to go underneath this block right here. done. So the next thing is going to be obviously creating the harness that moves from the SmoothFlite to these guys, as well as from the gear controller to those guys, and a light controller that's underneath here as well. And we also have the wiring that's coming from the front that we have to deal with. So here's the situation inside the fuselage. So we have all the wires that are coming from the back brought to the front, and the reason these are not in snakeskin is I don't think they will chafe too much because they're inside the fuselage, but the more important reason is that you can see I have the harness that disconnects the back from the front, which is basically all the stuff that's going to go into this unit. And so what I did here is I labeled everything obviously with a label marker, so you can see that left flap, left elevator, right elevator, and so on and so forth. But because there's certain things that come from the back, but they need to be ganged up separately. So for example, this harness here contains a few things. It contains the aileron, the flap, but also the gear door. But the gear door doesn't go into the SmoothFlite. The gear door goes into the gear controller. So to separate and gang them up, I just use my Tessa tape, and that's how you can see. It's just a wiring harness. And now what's going to happen is this stuff is going to come up through these holes and go into the SmoothFlite, and then the gear stuff and the gear door stuff are going to come through as well and go into the landing gear controller. So I think that keeps things neat, nice and clean. So there's going to be a bit of a mess down here, but that's fine because everything is labeled, actually double labeled. So we have the label here, and then we also have the label on the harness that shows the wiring. So did that on both sides, so you can see how those wires are ganged up, so I know what's coming up for the SmoothFlite, these guys, and what's going into the landing gear controller, that guy. So what's left here is the light controller that's going to sit in the bottom, and that light controller is going to have these guys expanded. So we have the light harness from the right wing, the light harness from the left wing. So I'm working on wiring the light controller for the L39, and this is a controller that comes with it. And you can see it's sort of labeled in there, but I found a post on RCU that explains what this is. So you have a few options here. You can either do flashing lights, steady on, or switched as in gear and whatnot. So what this is these first four, so that port, so these two pins, these two pins, these two pins, these two pins. So this port 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are going to be used for doing flashing lights if you want to. Then the next two ports are going to be for steady on. So that's this port right here and this port. So these two wires are going to be for steady on. And then the remaining, so these two, and then these top two are going to be used for switching your gear. And how you do that is on the opposite side of the controller, you have obviously your power cable, and I think this takes 2S, so we supply 2S voltage there. And then you have these two sets of wires. And if you look on the back, or somewhere in here, one of them says gear. So right here, that says gear. So if you hook up the gear wire, this guy, then you get the gear lights switched. And I believe if you hook up this, then you get all the lights switched or be able to turn on and off. So what I think I'm going to do is, because I want my nav lights to be steady on the whole time, I will just hook up my gear, so that wire, and then that now becomes wired with my gear channel. And when my gear's down, essentially what I'll have is my tip tank lights going onto the first port, and then my landing gear lights going into the second port, and my nose landing gear light going to the third port. And then the steady on will be the nav light, so that's the green and red on the tip of the wing. And that's pretty much it. What that wiring is going to look like, and you can see I've labeled it. So what I did is I wired from my harnesses that's coming from the wings. They go to these JST connectors, but I have my main left, my main right, and my nose light, and I put all those together, and those are going to go to one port. And then this second connection here, these are the tip tanks, the tip tank lights. So these are also going to be switched because I want them to turn on with the landing gear. So I wired those together, and those now are also labeled tip tank light. And then the last set from either wing are the nav light. So basically this is a harness for wing 1, harness for wing 2, and you can see they're identical. And then these ends are what's going to plug in to this controller. So it's going to look something like this. One's like that. And then the steady on. Ground is, yeah. So it's going to look something like that. Steady on for the nav lights. The nav lights, and then switched. I guess I can also bring these down here. Just like that. And that, I believe, should do what I want it to do for my lighting. And you can see this is a nice, easy harness, so that once this is in the plane, all the connections are just simple. So this goes to the wing harness, which is this guy, and so that it's easy to just disconnect. Once you disconnect this, you don't really have to worry about where they go in here. This just makes it such that servicing the jet is easy. You just need to disconnect these main connections. Everything comes apart. When you're done, click, 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 and you're good to go. And down here, none of this is going to be visible, but this looks a little bit like a mess of wires, but it isn't. Let me explain. So we basically have the harnesses coming from the wing on both sides. It's the right side, and you can't see that, but let's see if I can. This is the left side right here. And those carry wires for different things: control surfaces, gear, brakes, and lights. And so what this is just you gang up all of the gear doors. Those are gonna go to the gear door controller. That's one bundle. The second bundle is the controls that are associated with that are gonna go to the SmoothFlite. So you have your flaps on the right side, your aileron on the right side, and then you're gonna have your gear lights. This actually goes to the light controller here, and that's gonna go to the SmoothFlite and be ganged up with the gear channel. So that's basically the right side of what's gonna go to the SmoothFlite, and you can see that's pretty much it. And on the left side, we have all the control surfaces going to the left. You know, the right elevator, because all the elevator wires are routed through this side. But this is all the stuff that's going to go up to the SmoothFlite channel. And once you take those apart, you can see there's not really much left. The next thing that's left is really your gear and your brake. And those are right here. And so you have your left brake, right brake, and your right gear, and your left gear, and your nose gear. So all of those coming through here, and they're gonna get fed up and go to the gear controller as alongside these guys right here. But even if this looks confusing, I have put labels on everything so that when it's time to open up the jet, everything is very clearly labeled, and you can see what goes where. And the lighting harness is down here, and you can see that's just connected directly to the gear controller. These two will be routed up, and these are just going to go to the SmoothFlite inputs. And again, these also go all the way to the front of the jet. And that's really it for the electrical. So what I have here is the battery connections, and I've put some labels. So the turbine goes up here, the SmoothFlite goes on here, and the gear system power goes on here. What I try to do is make sure that things that use similar voltage levels have the same connector so that it is harmless to interchange. So for example, the turbine may use a different lipochemistry or life or whatever, so that's a separate plug. And so these guys are going to be installed right in here, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then the rest of the harnessing that meets up with the SmoothFlite and all the other connections. So I'll install that, and then I'll show you what that looks like. There's two of these, one for the left side and then one for the other side. So let's see, the smoke system batteries come down over here, and then you have one SmoothFlite on this side. There's an extension here just because to get CG you need a battery here, a 2S battery here, and a 2S battery on the front here. So that's why that extension is there, and it's labeled. On the other side, we have a very similar setup, except there are three things here. Those three things are, the top is the turbine, that's a 3S life, and then we have a SmoothFlite, and all of these are labeled, so you can see that. So it should be easy to find. So turbine up top, SmoothFlite is this guy, and then the gear system. And that also has an extension, just because to get CG right, we need to have one of the batteries sit in the front and one of the batteries sit up here. Okay, so now that I'm ready to install all the server connections and set up my receiver, the first thing I want to do is make sure that this unit has up-to-date software. And how you do that for the AR SmoothFlite is you buy this cable. Pacific RC Jet sells them, Buma RC sells them, and we're going to plug it into the front and USB, download their AR update utility, and let that process take care of itself. Okay, so the owner wanted the SF16 screen mounted on the jet, right in the spot. And so what I'm going to do is I've figured out where I want to mount it, made my holes, but I'm going to add just a little bit of 3M tape, not so much to get it to stick, but just as a little bit of vibration isolation. So I think between that and the fact that we are going to add a screw here and a screw on the other side, that screen is going to be fairly well protected. So the L39 is done, and you can see what layout we wound up with. So we have our UAT up front, our Buma RC SmoothFlite, and in here you can see the remote switch, and right next to it is the gear controller. That's the Xicoy LG-15. And then moving on back, we have our JetCat ECU data relay module, and then right here we have our JetCat pump. The fuel system. Fuel system is pretty straightforward. So you have your main tank, and this is an 8mm tubing just because the owner wanted high flow. And then in here is where we reduce that. So this is a Festo reducer from 8 to 6, and it goes to this UAT, which is very clearly labeled what goes where: tank, pump, fill. And then out the middle, that's the line for the turbine, and that's a 6mm out, but it gets reduced under here. You can see that other Festo that's hiding behind here to 4, goes up to here, comes around to the Festo valve, and then goes in through the back. Here you can see that turbine line is this thin one, and it goes through a filter, and that filter is directional, and then goes out into the turbine. So that's pretty much the fuel system. Now the second is the smoke system. So we have these smoke sticks that go to the back, and we're teeing off of one 4 mil line, and here's our reducer. So it goes from 4 mil to 6 mil. It goes all the way around through here, through this manual valve, so we can turn the smoke on and off manually. There's a label for it right there, so it says smoke, and then all the way down, and basically that comes up to the smoke pump. So that fill line for the smoke goes in, and since there's no UAT on this jet, what I did is I just come up to a Festo. Obviously this stuff is important just because of serviceability and disconnectivity. And then we have a T. This portion of the T goes up and comes out through the smoke dot up here, so you can pull that out. It's fairly tight, but it stays so that once you're done, you could just, that gets twisted back in place. Like that. And on the other side, obviously, we have our fuel dot, and also this also comes out for fueling and then can be stowed back in there. And those are properly labeled, fuel and smoke, just to avoid any confusion. For the fuel system or the turbine system, we have our JetCat pump right here, and then we have the mini I/O board for where the ground terminal unit connects to. So that's in here, and you've got the LEDs up top, and those are, so the way I mounted this is so that those can be visible in flight, and it should just be easy to plug that in. Then you have your JetCat ECU, and that's pretty much it. To turn this jet on and off, we're going to be using the AR remote switch, so that there's a key fob for that. Really love these guys. So one of these guys turns that jet on and off. We have two receivers in here, so you can see that there's one receiver right there, and that's oriented top down. We have a second receiver, that's that guy right there, and for that one, the wiring is such that it comes around here, and the antenna bits sort of sit in that orientation. So this guy is that way, up and down. This goes sort of like forward and back like that. Receiver is sitting right up in the front here, you can see that, and that sort of goes lengthwise across the aircraft, so that's the other orientation. We have one more antenna, and that's this gentleman right here. So that Spectrum satellite moves sort of up, and sits right at this point here, and the orientation is sort of across this way. So with those four antennas and satellite receivers, I think we've covered all the orientation bases that we need to for the jet. And that's pretty much it. So everything is labeled. I think this came out fairly clean. I'm happy with the layout here. Everything is reachable, everything is protected, everything is disassemblable if need be. And that should be exciting when it comes time to maintain the jet. So next thing I'm going to do is do some CG setup control throws, and then we'll get to mating this.